Representing Canada's financial capital, the fourth largest city in North America, and the most amazing city in the world. This is Toronto Business Journal.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another amazing edition of Toronto Business Journal. We have a very special guest today, Mr. Shawn Buckley, to talk about how everyone's natural care healthcare products are being endangered. So take it away, Santosh.
Shawn Buckley is a constitutional lawyer who also has the expertise in the area of drug regulation. In his 29 years of practicing law, Mr. Buckley has defended more natural health companies in court than any other Canadian lawyer. He has an enviable track record in court against Health Canada charges. Outside of court, Mr. Buckley has assisted natural health companies and practitioners navigate and deal with Health Canada. Mr. Buckley has attended on a number of occasions as an expert witness on the regulation of natural health products in the House of Commons. He has appeared as an expert witness on constitutional law in the Senate, attending as perhaps the only expert witness opposing Bill C-36, the Consumer Product Protection Act. Since 2008, Mr. Buckley has been the president of the Natural Health Products Protection Association, the NHPPA. The NHPPA is dedicated to protecting health rights with a focus on protecting access to natural health products. Mr. Buckley is a founding member and lead counsel for the National Citizens Inquiry. Thank you so much, Mr. Buckley, for joining us today, and it's an honor to have you here.
Very pleased to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mr. Buckley. So I just want to give our audience a little bit of a background why we chose to have this topic today in this important discussion with you, Mr. Buckley, concerning natural health care products. Myself, I sort of stumbled upon an article about the important work you're involved in, because I'm very much involved with going to the naturopathic treatment, going to the health store, getting various vitamins, quercetin, like all kinds of different supplements, which as a part of my philosophy of building the immunity of your body to help it against the diseases and all sorts of other breakdown of the body and stuff like that. So I'm also a half marathon runner. So I find and very important having access to these supplements and other natural remedies to keep the body strong and youthful. But I also have appreciated over the years that there is a interest among the big pharmaceutical companies that they want people to get disease so that they can give them one product that's going to treat one thing and give you maybe 4 or 5 other side effects, and give you another product like like you have the drug dealer want to hook you to their cocaine or the opioids or whatever. And so this is what I'm concerned about. So we definitely want to get sort of the background on this bill that you're saying. So is the bill going through the House of Commons, or where can you describe a little bit about this bill that we're that's threatening all these our access to supplements?
Yeah. So, and I think first of all, Peter, it's important to understand. So this Bill C-47, which has just passed and became law on June 22nd, is just kind of one part of an entire plan that Health Canada has called the Self-Care Framework. And I think it's also might be helpful to explain that we've just gone through a really long process to try and figure out how we should regulate natural health products. So for most of my life, they've been completely unregulated. So they were just because we had drug regulations that really the intention was that they were for chemical drugs. And the intention that they were for chemical drugs is just because chemical drugs really have a high risk profile. So in fact, if you were to pick like the 6 or 7 leading causes of death in every Western nation, the top 3 would be tied to the use of chemical pharmaceutical drugs, including using them as directed and highly preventable medical accidents. Like as a group, they're a very risky set of products. So we've created this legal basis where all chemical drugs are deemed to be illegal. So you can't create a new novel chemical and just introduce it into the public and without having to get pre-approval. So it's all presumed to be illegal. And that I mean, we've been doing that since the 30s. But in the late, mid 80s going into the 90s, Health Canada started to apply this principle, like just, okay, drugs apply now to natural products, which is kind of funny, right? I mean, you can go and buy parsley in the produce section, but if you want to dry it and grind it up and put it into a capsule, now we presume it to be dangerous and illegal, and you can't use it for a therapeutic purpose unless you get through this licensing scheme. So it doesn't really work. This legal presumption doesn't really work for natural products. That's really the bottom of the mischief. But so Health Canada is trying to take products away, and it escalates in the 1990s, and consumers rebel. And part of the Health Canada plan to treat these like chemical drugs was to bring in cost recovery. And so the citizens rebel. They start a lawsuit against the government, against this cost recovery. And the Minister of Health, Alan Rocky, backs down publicly. He holds a press conference on the eve of the lawsuit and says, we've listened to you, we've heard. He asked the Standing Committee on Health, which is an all-party committee in Parliament, will you tell us how to regulate natural health products? They have the broadest consultation in Canadian history of any standing committee in Parliament, and they say, don't treat them like drugs. These are stuff on our food supply. Don't treat them as drugs. Don't put them under a chemical drug model. They're not dangerous. People want increased access. So Canadians want increased access. They don't want decreased access. So Health Canada hums and haws for 5 or 6 years and imposes chemical drug style regulations on us called the Natural Health Product Regulations. But they are softer in that we're able to use traditional use evidence to get licensed. Now, we shouldn't have to get licensed in the first place, and we never had to before July of 2004 when these regulations came into force. So this is all new. But what's happening now, Peter, is Health Canada is basically saying, well, we're not happy with how we're doing it now. We want to actually totally harmonize our natural health products with the chemical drug model. And so there's several things they have to do this. So one is cost recovery. So they're bringing in cost recovery. They published that in the Canada Gazette saying, we're going to impose the same fees that we charge the chemical drug companies. So site licensing and product fees and et cetera. We're talking, the Health Canada's own projection, and they agree, we haven't costed everything out here, but I think it's like 118 million they're expecting to get in the first year. And then, but they're imposing stricter regulations, and that puts a cost on the businesses. So we're going to lose businesses. Every time you increase in a tight margin market, every time you increase business costs, you lose players. That's just the way it works. So some are going to become economic and drop out, and the number of product license applications will drop. So, and prices are going to increase for the products that remain. You increase the cost of doing business in a business environment where the margins are pretty tight, and then all of a sudden the prices are going to increase. Now, the interesting thing is because of the regulations we already have in place, prices are a lot higher than they used to be anyway. So right now, natural health is a privilege of the middle class and the upper class. If you're economically disadvantaged, there's no way you're going to a naturopathic doctor or the like and buying a whole bunch of natural health products. So now all of this is being justified by Health Canada. And I'll get into, there's some more things happening that are going to take products away. But I'd like to tell a story of kind of how I got involved. Because what it does is it kind of shows the two different mindsets. It shows Health Canada's mindset, and it shows kind of the opposite mindset that, wait a second, maybe Canadians should have the right to choose how they're going to treat their bodies. Because that's what this comes down to, is who gets to choose how we're going to treat ourselves when we're sick. And so my first brush with this industry, with natural health products, began in 1994 with a herbalist named Jim Strauss. Now, Health Canada hated this herbalist and was trying to shut him down because he was claiming to cure heart disease. And actually, he was quite fanatical about telling everyone he could meet about treating heart disease. And he had a good reason for that. So he was an older gentleman back in 1994. He flew for the German Air Force in World War II. He was from Austria. And his family had been traditional healers for 4 centuries.
Wow.
For 4 centuries, that family was in the traditional healing business, and he was trained by his grandparents. It was actually quite fascinating. Like now, you know, when we make a natural health product, you have to test for the active ingredient, and, you know, and then that'll tell you how much to put in because, you know, you've got a formula. Well, what do you do before you've got labs? It was all taste. Like, it was really interesting having him describe how, you know, he had taste this, taste this, taste this. Like if you didn't have the tasting gene, you couldn't be a master herbalist. But anyway, so he's trained in the family business, but he has no interest in it at all. He gets a PhD in electrical engineering. He's working for BC Hydro. He has a heart attack.
Oh.
He's rushed by the ambulance to the hospital. They do an angiogram. He's got one artery completely plugged. He's got another 80% plugged. And the doctors say, Jim, you need a double bypass surgery to survive. And he didn't like that idea. So he checks himself out of the hospital. He creates his Strauss heart drops. He cures himself. He lived another 30 years, like he died in an old folks' home, never having a bypass surgery. And he thought, okay, well, I have to share this with the world. So he quits his job at BC Hydro and he opens his little herb shop and, you know, makes other remedies too. But his flagship was these heart drops, and he couldn't shut up about it. Well, Health Canada is going ballistic because they don't want, I can tell you as a fact, Health Canada doesn't want any serious health condition treated with something that isn't a chemical that had a patent. Like, full stop. So Jim is importing herbs from the United States, which are perfectly legal for him to import, and Health Canada seizes them. Basically, Health Canada steals his herbs, and he's suing them. And I end up representing Health Canada against him. So he's suing Health Canada. I go to court representing Health Canada, and Health Canada's telling me just how dangerous it is. They called him a rogue herbalist. So how dangerous it is to have this rogue herbalist claiming to treat serious conditions with an unapproved product. And I'm too stupid to know that every product on the Canadian market, natural product, is not approved. The whole industry is unregulated at this time. I mean, this is 1994. We didn't have any regulations for another decade. No one felt unsafe going into a health food store. I mean, even like 10 years ago, half of the stuff was unregulated. Did you feel uncomfortable going to an Ayurvedic doctor or into a health food store? No, you didn't, because there wasn't a problem. But so back then, everything was unregulated. So it was, but they were just picking on him because actually he was having success. So I have his matter dismissed because he was suing the federal government in the wrong court. And I start my own law practice the following year. In an attempt to take him down, Health Canada convinces the College of Physicians and Surgeons of British Columbia to charge him with practicing medicine, because the act that says only doctors can practice medicine, the practice of medicine included making treatment claims. So he's now charged, criminally with practicing medicine, and he hires me to defend him. And I'm thinking, on the facts, this is not a good case at all, because it says only doctors can make treatment claims. And he can't, he's not only making treatment claims, like literally he drove around in a white van with red letters across it saying, "We cure heart disease." Like when I said this guy was passionate, he was passionate. So I'm thinking, well, how am I going to defend this guy? And it dawns on me, I've just got to attack the law, because we have freedom of expression as a charter guarantee, Section 2B, And here we've got a law saying that people can't make treatment claims if they're not a doctor. So I let the Crown and the court know I was going to ask the court to strike down that part of the legislation as being unconstitutional. And I got to work. Now, the law was on my side, but if the judge accepted the Health Canada narrative, the judge isn't going to want to strike the law down. So if the judge is convinced by Health Canada, look how reckless and dangerous this is. This rogue herbalist is basically claiming to treat a serious health condition, heart disease. And what if people delay getting treatment? They literally could die. Like, so the presumption is that they don't work and that this is just snake oil. And if a judge accepted that, like, psychologically, the judge isn't going to want to side with me. So it would be nice if I could convince the judge that there's some merit to what Jim was saying. So I go to his little herb shop and I sit down and I say, Jim, like, I know you can tell your story, but you know, you're going to come across as biased. You're being charged here, right? Is there any other way we can show that what you're saying is true, that you do treat heart disease? Like, and then knowing there'd be no clinical evidence. So he just basically gets up, he walks into the back and he brings me a box. And he goes back and he brings me another box, and he goes back and brings me another box. And these are boxes. It might have been 5 boxes. It was 3 or 5. I don't remember now, so long ago. But they were boxes filled with letters that people felt compelled to write him. He wasn't asking people to write him letters, but he's constantly receiving these letters. And they were all the same. Like, I had heart disease, I was sick, I was dying, I took your heart drops, I got well, God bless you. Now, those letters are useless to me in court, pure hearsay. But I can call the authors of the letters to take the stand, swear to tell the truth, and then tell the truth. And that's actually the highest form of evidence in court. So I start calling these people. And on the day of trial, I had 5 middle-class professionals. I picked that because the judge is middle-class professionals. I had so many to choose from. Thought, well, okay, I'm gonna call the judge's peer group in here. They had all had heart disease. They had all had 1 open heart bypass surgery. One of them had had 2. They all continued to have heart disease because the reasons they were plugging up in the first place weren't being addressed. They all needed another open heart bypass surgery to survive. 2 of them were too weak to survive the surgery, so the doctor said, ethically, we can't give you a surgery that's going to kill you, so go home and die. And the other 3 had had so much trouble, like the surgery is so invasive and difficult to overcome and recover from, they weren't willing to go through it again just to buy another year or 2 of life. So for them, the medical system was a dead end, full stop. All the approved treatments are a death sentence for them. They come across these heart drops. They all get well. They are all working full-time at trial. Like, they'd all been disabled for years. One of them had been disabled for 10 yeand you can't fake that. You can't be disabled for years and then working full-time. Like, it just doesn't work that way. And that made me realize, like, when I was acting for Health Canada, I believed it. I believed it was dangerous to allow people to decide that they might want to try an unapproved herbal remedy for a serious health condition. I believed it. But yet, when I had the experience acting for him, I came to realize, like, that was untrue. I could have given you the names, addresses, and phone numbers of thousands and thousands of Canadians that were only alive because of this unapproved product. And their stories were similar. And then some people, you know, like, Sonny, if you're told you have to have a double open heart bypass surgery to survive and you're terrified about that and you don't want to do it, like, shouldn't you have the right to decide, well, maybe I want to try something else? And
yes, of course.
Risk on yourself. Like, this really is about who gets to decide. And the difficulty that we have with what's happening with Health Canada putting us into position where they're going to regulate these products like chemical drugs is we're just going to lose them. And we're going to lose the products that the naturopathic doctors and the homeopathic doctors and the herbalists rely on. So not only do we have this cost recovery coming in, and not only do we have them increasing the regulatory burden dramatically, but other planks of this self-care framework are, you're not going to be able to use traditional use evidence to get a license. Like, I mean, aside from the fact you shouldn't have to apply for a license for Health Canada, we didn't have to before and everything was fine. But now that we're under this regime where you have to, and we're going to go under a stricter regime, at least the natural health product regulations, you can use traditional use evidence. So, I mean, let's say the traditional Chinese medicine practitioners, I mean, their history of using specific herbs and combinations of herbs and plants for specific conditions goes back thousands of years. Same with the Ayurvedic. And in the herbalist tradition, it can go back 1,000 years and definitely centuries and centuries. I mean, let's say we had a currency collapse in Canada, or a currency collapse internationally, and for, a 6-month period, international trade was totally disrupted while a new system is put into place, and we're not getting citrus fruits anymore, and Canadians are like, we're dialed back 150 years where we're eating meat and potatoes and that's it, like, to get through this. And scurvy comes back, vitamin C deficiency comes back, and the three of us decide, well, why don't we make this super concentrated rosehip tea? Rosehips are high in vitamin C to treat scurvy. Well, right now, we could use traditional use evidence to say, vitamin C works pretty good against scurvy. We literally could use the British naval records where, when they first had the sailing ships on these long voyages and they didn't know they had to have vitamin C in their diet, the sailors would get so weak their warships couldn't function. Like, it was a national emergency, and they're trying to find the answer, and the answer is limes. So they add limes to the diet. So now all these voyages, they have tons of limes, and you had to eat a lime a day, and no problem. The fighting ships, the men can fight. They're fine, which is why we call British sailors limeys.
Oh.
That's why we call them limeys, because they had to eat a lime a day. Well, we could use those records to justify our claim, that rosehip tea, high in vitamin C, could help treat scurvy. Well, if we can't do that anymore, we'd have to run a double-blind clinical trial, which would cost millions of dollars. And actually, we might have to do 2. And because we don't have a patent, because you have no intellectual property rights over a plant like rosehips, then anyone else could go in and just sell them after we get approval and say, well, they've already proved that it works. They've run the 2 double-blind. And so we couldn't charge enough to get our money back. Right? You see, that's the problem, is intellectual property rights. We wouldn't spend hundreds of millions of dollars to get approval because we'd never get our money back. So like in my lifetime, so for serious health conditions, you have to go through what's called the new drug approval process. Well, an average cost is $1 billion. In my lifetime, and I'm 58, there's only been one drug that's gone through that process that didn't have a patent, and that was pushed through by government money. So the whole system's designed to basically privilege chemical drugs that have a patent on it. You see the problem here. So once we move into this model where we have to run double-blind clinical trials for any serious health condition, well, then the only remedies available are your chemical drugs, and that's how they're playing this game. They're not passing a law saying natural health products are illegal, you can't use them. They're just putting us in a regulatory structure where they're not going to be approved for serious conditions. So they're taking away our right to use traditional use evidence to justify, get a license when we shouldn't be having to get a license in the first place. And then the next thing they're doing with this self-care framework is right now under the natural health product regulations, there's no limit on the types of conditions for which you can apply for a license. Now, they limit us to structure function claims. So the Strauss heart drops probably say something like, supports cardiovascular health, but at least that's a heart condition. And, naturopathic doctors and the like can tell their patients to use it for serious things if they want, and they would know how much and give you direction. There's a company, True Hope, that has a product, Empower Plus, which may very well be the best treatment for serious bipolar disorder in the world. Like some psychiatrists, it's all they use, because if it works, no side effects, you're not doped out. Like, it's like a light switch, you're well again. And there was a period of time, like when they first were on the market, and before you had to get Health Canada approval to be on the market, where the people using that product, by and large, were those people that would be involuntarily committed to psych wards.
Oh.
And once you're in that cohort where you're getting involuntarily committed to psych wards, where they drug you up on a drug cocktail, and you're actually in the hospital for months and months, solely because you're so drugged up, you're drooling over yourself 24 hours a day. And it's only when you start to get used to the drug cocktail enough that that's not happening, they send you home on 24-hour suicide watch. And then you finally get so acclimatized to the drug, you're manic and suicidal again, and then you get involuntarily committed, and they put you in another drug cocktail, rinse and repeat. Those people don't live 5 years once they're in that cohort. Like, it's a death sentence, and your life is a living hell. So those people started using this product, knowing that there was no clinical evidence, knowing that it really was all anecdotal evidence, but all the approved drugs for them were a death sentence. It was just like Strauss heart drops people, and they got well. Like, Health Canada charged them criminally, like charged True Hope criminally for selling this for treating serious mental illness. And I called these people as witnesses. And, you know, it was spooky when I was starting to call just a whole bunch to see who would be good witnesses. You know, you have as a lawyer, you've kind of got a pre-list of questions that you've thought of to ask. Well, there was one thing they were volunteering that I never thought of to ask. 100% of the people I called as potential witnesses said, you know, I had a suicide plan in place. Oh. If I was to run out of the product, I was going to kill myself while I was still well, while I was still mentally competent. I was going to kill myself rather than go back. Now, can you imagine being so sick for so long that when you get healthy again, it was so awful that you would actually have a suicide plan in place in case you ran out of the product and were going to face going back to that? Like, you'd kill yourself while you were still well. I can't imagine. And these people testified about that in court. And I called Ron Lajeunesse, who was the Alberta branch president of the Canadian Mental Health Association, who talked about this every time there was a death of a Canadian Mental Health Association person because Health Canada restricted access to the product. He would go to the funeral, and then he'd hold a press conference in an attempt to shame Health Canada. Now, where I'm going with this Empower Plus story is there are 35 published peer-reviewed research articles on this product, all funded by governments, including Canadian governments. But governments around the world have stumped up taxpayers' money to fund research into a vitamin and mineral supplement being used as a treatment of bipolar disorder. And these publications, like some of them are the blue chip ones, like Journal of Psychiatry, Journal of Child and Adolescent Psychopharmacology. Now, True Hope had these on their website prior to June 22nd. Now, what happens on June 22nd? This budget bill passes and the penalties are increased. And this is part of the self-care framework. So prior to that, True Hope could risk sharing truthful health information with Canadians, because if Health Canada took them to court, the maximum fine was $5,000. But now, as of June 22nd, the maximum fine, listen to this, it's gone from $5,000 to $5 million per day of offense. So every day you're in violation is a separate $5 million fine. Oh, they're a company. Oh, but it doesn't matter that you're a company. Every director, every officer, every employee involved is also personally liable for $5 million a day fines. You can't resist that. So they took those research articles down. Now we have censorship because everyone is afraid of these penalties, which are beyond, like, penalties are supposed to be there so that we get, you know, most of the people complying with laws, right? Like, you never get 100% compliance with laws, but you want most people to comply with laws. You can put up with the outliers. So you want to have penalties that will accomplish that, and penalties aren't supposed to be to destroy people. But these are not penalties made to bring people into compliance. they're penalties that destroy people. Like in legal terms, we just call it tyranny, because you can't even have a dialogue with the regulatory body in a situation like that. And tyranny just means absolute discretion. So now Health Canada inspectors have absolute discretion. They can just tell you to do anything and you have to do it. Plus, as of June 22nd, they have these powers to basically order you to do anything that they think you need to do. And if you don't obey their order, it's $5 million a day fines for every day you're not obeying. Like we've entered a brave new world as far as this goes. And so I've had like calls with a whole bunch of practitioners, and people are saying, oh, well, if Health Canada takes these products away, we'll just create underground networks where we can access these products. And I say, well, sure you will, with $5 million a day fines. Like you could do that when they were $5,000 fines.
So, but in terms of, okay, so the first thing which is useful for everybody to know, which you would know much more of, is who are the people that are in Health Canada? I mean, are we talking about these inspectors? Are we talking about just mindless bureaucrats, or is Health Canada being run by former employees and managers and directors of pharmaceutical and various interests which have a financial or personal interest in keeping natural healthcare products at bay, and their friends in pharmaceuticals raking in the profits? What sort of dynamic is going on within Health Canada?
Now, Peter, that's a tough question to answer, isn't it? Because if you're not in the inside, we're just speculating. But let me share with you something that isn't speculation. And, it's just, I will say that in my opinion, and it's just my personal opinion, is that Health Canada has been largely captured by the pharmaceutical companies for quite some time. And I think part of the mischief, how we've arrived there is, the Mulroney government in the early to mid 90s brought in cost recovery so that Health Canada could charge the pharmaceutical companies fees for the service. Because most of Health Canada's budget comes now from the pharmaceutical industry, the fees they charge. And that creates a conflict of interest. And whenever you're dealing in an area of safety, public health and safety, you really shouldn't be placing the regulatory agency in a situation where there can be a conflict of interest. It's just not good public policy. But there was a drug approval scientist who was a drug approval scientist at Health Canada for 30 years, Dr. Shiv Chopra. And Dr. Chopra actually ran for a while the veterinary drug approval wing of Health Canada, but he spent most of his career in the human drug approval. And very ethically became a whistleblower, and he forced the Senate to call him and 4 other Health Canada drug approval scientists as witnesses. And one of those, Dr. Margaret Hayden, and you should still be able to find this online. After she testified, she was interviewed by the CBC, back when the CBC would report on stuff like this. And she told the CBC, after you've been a drug approval scientist at Health Canada for a period of time, you come to understand how they're going to get around your decision when your decision is, no, we really shouldn't approve this drug. I've gone through this drug approval application. I'm the expert you've hired to do this. This is what I do for a living for you. And I don't think it's in the interest of Canadians that we grant this drug approval. She says, well, after a while, you learn how they're going to get around your decision. And it's ingenious. It's simple and it's ingenious, and nobody can be liable for it. So the management, and she made it clear, the management are never scientists or doctors. They're often engineers and people like that without expertise, will hire a group of outside experts. So there'll be a panel of outside experts to then review, should we approve this drug? Should we not approve this drug? You never know how this group votes. It's just a group approval. So they can't be personally liable. And then the recommendation back is, oh yeah, you should approve this. So Health Canada approves it. Well, the management can't be liable. They're relying on this group of experts. And it's ingenious, isn't it? And that's how Health Canada gets drugs approved that their own in-house scientists say should not be approved because they're not in the public interest. Now, when you have this going on for years and years and years, you have an in-house problem. So why is this coming in now? I can tell you that, I kind of explained, we had this citizen rebellion and we had the Standing Committee of Health, come out with 53 recommendations, and you can still get that report. It's on the Parliament website. And in fact, we've written a discussion paper. There's a nonprofit called the Natural Health Product Protection Association. So the website is www.nhppa.org. There's a discussion paper on what's happening right now, and it has a link to the Standing Committee of Health report, because we want everyone to read the Standing Committee of Health report. So, but the point I'm making is there was a lot of effort to come up with how we should regulate these products, and then it literally took us 10 or 12 years to get the industry in compliance because they were unregulated, and it takes time to get up to speed and get everyone on side and all the products licensed and all of this. Well, then in 2017, like just as we're there, like this has literally been, you know, a 20-year process. Just as we're there in 2017, Health Canada tours Canada, holding, you know, big conferences with the industry, announcing we're going to throw all of this away, and we're bringing in the self-care framework. So a gentleman named Dean Parks did an access to information request, saying, because what Health Canada was saying at these meetings was, we're imposing this, it's non-negotiable, so don't ask for any change, and it's non-negotiable because it's come from a group of senior management. So an ATI was done, well, access to information request, well, who's on this panel of senior management that's imposing this? And it was 4 bureaucrats, and none of them have any expertise in the management of natural health products, but some of them have clear links to international trade. So I think this was just imposed from outside. Health Canada's been involved in a bunch of initiatives to harmonize how our drugs are regulated with other Western nations. And is there any other country that is doing so much at the World Health Organization to give away its national sovereignty than Canada? Like, if there is, please let me know, because we seem to be at the forefront of giving away our national sovereignty. I don't know if you know about the One Health Initiative and the treaty we won't call a treaty.
Yeah. With that said, what sort of legal resistance collectively there is going on against this, this Health Canada machinations? Because in my personal background, as someone who has some background in law, this sounds like the easiest class action suit ever to get all these people who are taking natural supplements who are getting better all across Canada. Pick your jurisdiction if you want, Ontario or Quebec, that has a certain reputation for being progressive in certain areas. File your litigation, get everybody involved from the natural health care industry, people taking this supplement. It just seems to me that this is like the easiest class action ever to challenge Health Canada, getting invasive and for this complete absurdity. So is there any sort of legal resistance to this, or still talking about it?
Well, there isn't. And what I'm afraid of with court action is this stuff would take years and years to get through the pipeline, because it always does. I mean, I know of one company that's been basically challenging these natural health product regulations, and that lawsuit, I think, is 17 years old right now because Health Canada keeps dragging it out. So I really think that the solution, and not to discount, because court cases can make a difference. And, remember, I already said, like back in 1998, the government backed down on an eve of a lawsuit, but it took quite some time to get to the eve of the lawsuit. But I really think this one's going to be political. But I think that this is going to be harder than 98, and it's going to be harder than 2008, because we're further down the line of this international harmonization. And we're literally...
Yes, Santosh, could you turn off your phone?
Yeah.
Sorry about that, Mr. Buckley.
Oh, no worries at all. It happens.
Good thing we're not live, so it's recorded. So.
Okay, so I'll answer that question again.
Yeah.
So, there may be merit in lawsuits, but the difficulty is lawsuits can take years and years and years. In fact, I'm aware of one lawsuit that a company has against the natural health product regulations themselves. I think it's in the 17th year, because Health Canada has been so effective at basically putting off the court actually getting to, hearing on the merits. So, I'm not saying we shouldn't start lawsuits. It's just, I think that because it can take so long, that the solution, it needs to be political. And I also think it's going to be more difficult this time because, you know, in 2008 and 1998, we weren't so far along with this international harmonization with other countries and with the World Health Organization. I mean, literally, I mean, we're at the point where Canada is about to enter. They're not calling it a treaty deliberately. And so maybe they'll end up calling it a binding agreement, but literally where Canada will give up its right if the World Health Organization declares a pandemic. And like, remember, they declared a pandemic over monkeypox. Was it this calendar year or last calendar year? Like, it might still be an official World Health Organization pandemic, but recently they declared monkeypox to be a pandemic worldwide, and Canada just ignored it because it wasn't a problem in Canada. But we're entering an agreement where we can't ignore it, where actually we would lose our sovereignty. So the World Health Organization would have the right to dictate to us how we're going to manage that pandemic. And the thing that confuses me about that is surely Canada has expertise within Canada, you know, at both the federal and provincial levels to figure out how we should handle a pandemic. And we just went through one. Like, are you telling me we don't have expertise? And if we maintain our own sovereignty over this, it doesn't mean we couldn't follow what the World Health Organization is recommending. It's just, I can't get my head around that we would give up the right to choose for ourselves like we just did with monkeypox. That's the part that confuses me. But the fact that we're actively going down that road tells me that, you know, the bureaucracy within Canada really thinks it's a good idea to, you know, just basically harmonize internationally, right to the point where we don't have the right to even decide. So I can't answer your question specifically, why are we doing this? Except I can say in my 29 years of practice, it has been crystal clear that Health Canada has wanted to take away this option from us. And I think that it's just offensive from a personal sovereignty perspective.
Well, you know, definitely, you know, like, you know, I 100% agree with you. Is offensive from a personal national sovereignty perspective. Lawsuits are time-consuming; they take a long time. Ideally, the political route is less costly and could be quicker. But unless there is a strong political voice, whether it's a political party or somebody or some institution that has a lot of money that's willing to create the publicity that's going to get the government interests that are perpetrating this to back down. One thing which I've noticed is that, you know, in civil rights and other law-type lawsuits, that a lawsuit can also be a political rallying call. If people are being faced $5 million fines on all sorts of legal threats to their ability to survive as a natural healthcare organization, if you create a lawsuit and say, okay, as a call to action, that we have a class action where, you know, we want to know parties involved in this action, and we're going to start putting injunctions into people on behalf of people whose life is being threatened by action taken to Health Canada to ban their access from certain drugs. I can see yes, it's going to take some time, but I can also see a class action, which also is more frequently used in the United States, as a political device to get people aware that there is a legal threat to their sovereignty over their body to have access to these healthcare products. And we need to take legal action to affirm our rights against the $5 million a day threats and all the other legal support that Health Canada is using, backed by the government, to quash these organizations and make life for yourself difficult and other healthcare interests. So I'm just thinking, because I know that in the state, I mean,
and I agree with you. I mean, there's no downside in this campaign. I think you're making a fantastic point.
Yeah.
You know, the only thing I'm worried about, and this is interesting, and I don't know if, you know, the public's really aware of this. And it doesn't matter. Like, we've just gone through COVID.
Yeah.
And we have had, and this point, it doesn't matter where you are in this COVID conversation, because, there's people that just diametrically disagree on how they interpret what happened. It doesn't matter where you are in the COVID conversation.
Mm-hmm.
We have just all experienced the most significant government intrusion
Mm-hmm.
into our lives, even in wartime. We haven't experienced this much government intrusion even in wartime for those that are still alive, that lived through the First and Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you agree or disagree with all of the actions, the interesting thing from a lawyer perspective is, and I've asked lawyers, and I've stated this publicly, and nobody's pointed me to a single case. So I can't point you to a single case that will put a single break on any level of government if this happens again, that would say, no, you can't go as far as you did the last time. Like, there's not a single case out there that puts any restraint on any level of government if we find ourselves in a similar situation. And so when you've just had basically the largest intrusion of government in our lifetime, if it happens again, they're going to go further because there's not a single court case. And I find that fascinating, like just from a legal perspective, how we could find ourselves in an environment where there's not a single case saying, no, you went too far and you can't do that next time. So, and that makes me less optimistic about, court cases here, but court cases are also a political tool, and they're a motivational tool. And who knows, you might win, because the law should be on our side. We should have the right to decide how we treat ourselves when we're facing a health crisis. Like, surely, the case law says we have those types of rights. So I think you raised a good point.
Yeah. So I guess, just to recap a little bit, so we have, I guess, because I know that has a situation where the government has taken, sought to decriminalize, marijuana and personal pot possession, and create a framework to be able to sell it on the street. But it's still a little strange and ironic to a certain extent that we now seem to be in a situation where people's access to natural health stuff that's going from the ground and stuff people's access to natural health is being criminalized in a way that can make the pharmaceuticals, dependency on these chemicals rather than nature's, good nature, Mother Nature's own solutions. So we're we're running into a criminalization context for natural health products, and so that's and is this mostly going on? I guess, is it worse in Canada or is the United States? Because Canada, you said Canada is sort of the forefront of following the WHO. So is it as bad in the United States or in Europe, or is Canada just trying to be a trendsetter in terms of trying to create this criminalization of natural healthcare products?
So before I answer that question, let me strengthen what you said, because you were pointing out how, with marijuana we've decriminalized. Like, are you aware that the federal government has decriminalized hard drugs in British Columbia?
Oh,
so we're
okay.
talking cocaine, we're talking heroin, we're talking fentanyl, we're talking crystal meth. They've been decriminalized in British Columbia at the request of the British Columbia government. That's already happened. So
what bill is that?
In this calendar year, you will see legal sales.
Okay.
In Vancouver and across British Columbia of cocaine, of heroin, of methamphetamine, you name it, and right down to fentanyl. So in an attempt to reduce so that at least people buying heroin and cocaine know it's not laced with fentanyl, for example. That's the rationale. Okay. But it's interesting. So I haven't looked at the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, but so for the other provinces where it's not criminal, do you face $5 million a day fines for selling cocaine or heroin or crystal meth? I don't think the fines are that high. But if you're selling encapsulated parsley in Canada, and without a license, you're looking at $5 million a day fine. So I hadn't even thought of that argument, Peter. That juxtaposition.
Well, I have a legal background, so that's why
but it makes
you to go forward.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to add that to the public messaging, because it kind of makes it a little more ridiculous, right?
Exactly. Exactly. That's going to be a strong legal argument, like, why, like having access to health parsley is being fined more than if you have cocaine possession. Like that is a strong legal argument. That's that's going to make it a class action even more winnable.
So I hope that your viewers, really hide their encapsulated parsley well, because I don't want to see them destroyed financially, and I think that would be a public service, So But you had asked about other countries. So the United States is the freest. So they had a citizen rebellion in the early 90s, just as we did, and are simmered a little longer than theirs. And they forced Congress to back down. So they passed in 1994 what's called the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994. And what we call natural health products, they're not classed as drugs in the United States. So you don't have to get pre-licensing. They're classed as foods because the same ingredients are by and large in our food supply. So they've taken a completely different approach, which is kind of funny. So Health Canada is telling us we need to basically regulate these off the market because they're so dangerous. And yet, if you drive to the United States, I don't see bodies on the street. They're largely unregulated. They're treated as foods. So it kind of makes their argument silly. But you'll notice in the mainstream media, like that, the messaging is out there that these products are so dangerous, we need to regulate them. And the Auditor General just in the last year did a report just saying that, well, these products are so dangerous and Health Canada needs to have these stricter fines and needs to regulate them more. They need cost recovery so they can do this properly. Like, what, really? Really? When across the border, they're treated as foods and everyone seems to be okay. And I did an access to information request about 12 years ago of Health Canada, and I asked them in this access to information request, and they're legally obligated to respond. I said, I want you to show me every death that you can point to. So I want all evidence of every death in our history. Let's go back to Confederation at 1867, caused by a natural health product, as that term is defined in our natural health product regulations. So there was no ambiguity what I meant. And they got back to me and they said, come on, we can't go back to 1867. But since 1965, in response to the thalidomide disaster, we set up a robust adverse reaction reporting system, and we've got all the data from that. So from 1965 onwards, we've been tracking pretty good adverse reactions, including deaths to all drugs, including natural health products. Will you just accept 1965 to the date of your request? Oh, hard adder. Do you know how many deaths they were able to point out from 1965 to about 12 years ago caused by natural health products?
0 to 2, 0.
Goose egg, 0.
Goose egg, okay.
Now that doesn't mean there haven't been deaths, but it means that if there have been deaths, that they've been so few and far between that they haven't surfaced within the adverse reaction database, because there is an underreporting factor in databases like that. Now, compare that with, let's take acetaminophen. So that's brand name Tylenol. So a very common over-the-counter chemical drug that probably every viewer has in their home.
Yep.
Well, acetaminophen, taken as directed, kills roughly 1 Canadian per million per year. So there's 40 million of us. So on a yearly basis, we would expect 40 deaths, and those deaths are reported. I mean, you can get the data, and those are just taken as directed. So that would mean that in a single year of the use of one over-the-counter chemical drug, we would have more deaths than we could point to in all of our history of the entire natural health product industry. And that kind of shows, when they're telling us this is dangerous, that's a little bit misleading. Okay, it's a lot misleading. So it's crazy misleading. And then they don't take into account the danger of removing these products from the market. And I've already given you a couple of examples of, you can't assume these products don't work.
You have a question, Santosh?
No, I'm pretty amazed by how much the regulations are. They're just very lopsided. It seems like something that can actually cure people is like being heavily penalized, and then on the other hand, as you said, like some hard drugs are being legalized. It's very bizarre. And what do you think is going to be the future? Is this are people like eventually going to be able to like just bypass all this government regulation and like go for the cure, or like do you think there will be more and more
No, well,
fear?
I think the problem is because of these $5 million a day fines
Yeah.
that we're not going to have underground networks. Like we have to get this,
Okay.
we have to get these sections that just passed in the federal budget. They were sections 500 to 504. So
Okay.
we have to get those sections repealed. Like we have to get that changed. That's just full stop. We can't have $5 million a day penalties on natural health product companies. Like for a company like Pfizer, fine. In fact, that's probably not high enough. That's pocket change for the
Oh,
chemical drug companies. But for, natural health product companies, like most of them are quite small. Like, I mean, we're
yes.
talking small. Like nobody can withstand that. It's just silly. So we can't even resist by having, underground products that are illegal, as crazy as that is. We can't have that with these fine structures, which is why they brought this fine structure in, because they know they're squeezing us out. They know they're squeezing our health practitioners out. It's going to take a couple of years, but if we don't resist now, we're done. So, I mean, it's not like you're not going to have products in 2 months or at Christmas time, although, but this time next year, you're going to be noticing a difference. And 2 years from now, we're done. We're fully done. So, and it might not even take that long. So we have to act now,
Right.
but we have time to act. We can do this.
So the 5 million people are actually paying that off? Like they have to pay it off, or is there any way people can like write it off, or like I don't know, understand?
What do you mean, a fine?
Yeah, that seems
These
very
just-
high. The
these
5
just-
million. My
These
goodness.
just came into force a couple of weeks ago, so June 22nd. So they're brand new. Nobody's been charged with the fine yet. They're brand new.
Oh, okay.
So as of June 22nd, the fines have gone up from $5,000 to per offense. So for example, when I say per offense, like I'll pick on naturopathic doctors, and I love them, and I'm glad that they do this. But they, as a group, advertise. Like they'll run ads. So they might run an ad for a month in the newspaper, saying, "Hey, I've got this treatment for arthritis, and I've got this treatment for bowel disorders like colitis." Like they do this thing. Now, the treatments that they're using for these, they actually do work for what they're like. The advertising's truthful, but Health Canada takes the position it's illegal because let's say there's a product that's approved for bowel disorder. It will say there'll be a label claim like supports digestive health or something, which is completely meaningless. Well, Health Canada takes the position that's all you can say. So it might treat colitis really well. In fact, it might treat colitis like no therapeutic product, be it plant or chemical, works for every person. But on average, I would be willing to wager that the natural health products work way better, like percentage-wise, than the chemical drugs. But if you can't advertise as a naturopathic doctor that you're treating colitis, nobody's going to come to you. Like that's just the way it is. But Health Canada will say you can't say that at all because that's not the label claim. So let's say you ran that ad for a month before June 22nd. Well, that'd be one offense. You've run a month ad, and so you'd get charged if they chose to charge you, and the maximum fine is $5,000. Well, now for that month ad, the maximum fine is $5 million per day you were in violation. So all 30 days, what's that? 600 million? Or no? Oh yeah, it is. So, but it's not just you. Like your secretary that phoned the newspaper and placed the ad. Well, she participated in the offense. She's also personally liable. And so you can't run those ads anymore. Like I gave you the example. True Hope took down all that research, 35 peer-reviewed published journal publications, all funded by governments around the world. Like, no, Canadians can't have that truthful health information now. And health censorship of truthful health information is a huge problem for us going forward because of this fine structure. Like I was telling you about cost recovery. like how they're imposing these fines. Well, they say in their documents, so right in the Canada Gazette where they publish the notice, and they've got a section on their website about cost recovery, they are telling us we're going to use those funds to hire more Health Canada police to enforce the new strict regulations and to go into the marketplace to look for advertising. They want to hire basically police officers to go and censor advertising.
Mm-hmm.
And we're already protected against fraudulent advertising. We have Section 9 of the Act. We've got the fraud provisions in the criminal codes. We've got, the fraud provisions in our Telecommunications Act. Like, we've got 3 different agencies looking for fraudulent claims. I'm talking about truthful claims.
So they've managed to go beyond simply a naturopathic or somebody making a claim that, I can cure heart disease. They've managed to go get into censorship by trying to restrict scientific data from coming forth, which contradicts with the desire of Health Canada interests to promote the chemical drug company's own agenda of trying to sell their products, and while keeping down the side effects from public knowledge. That's another thing. I mean, these chemical drug companies, a lot of them stuff cause side effects, but they're allowed to advertise and not without any information, critical information to the people about the side effects they can cause.
Well, actually, they're not allowed to advertise in Canada. We're not like the States, where they can direct advertise to consumers. So, on our Canadian television, we still see a lot of the American ads with the feeds that we get. But, the chemical companies too are limited to just the label claim in their representations, but they do the marketing to doctors and the like, and Lord knows what they're told, right? So, but they've got this whole network where our whole healthcare system and medical doctors, I mean, their solution for everything is the chemical pharmaceutical drugs and basically managing side effects. So it's an entirely different model, and and our healthcare system does not allow people to access any other model, which in itself is quite interesting.
But what is the political way forward in terms of people wanting to get involved? And are you optimistic as far as the political way forward? Because my appreciation of our political system is that the chemical drug companies like to be connected with as many prominent political parties and politicians to make sure that their agenda gets promoted. So what is the political way forward that you're envisioning to resist and hopefully be victorious against this invasive Health Canada process of trying to criminalize the use of and access to and information about natural healthcare products?
And I'll first start by saying I share your skepticism about the political system and just the undue influence that's there. I actually think that, you're accurate. I share your opinion on that. What makes me hopeful is just how passionate people get about this issue. Like, I mean, aside from the trucker convoy, which, is its own entity, this is the issue that in my lifetime twice have been the 2 largest citizen uprisings, and both times government backed down. And I've already said, I think this time is going to be harder because we're so much further down that train. And I also think the influence in Parliament is so much higher. But what's different this time too is so we have the natural health product community that is pretty big and gets excited, but we also have now all these freedom groups because of the COVID experience and a pretty significant percentage of the population, and they're not necessarily the same. There's going to be overlap between those 2 groups, but there's a whole other sector of people that are just feeling that Parliament has become unresponsive to us and, taken too much power and become too controlling. Those 2 groups will join on this issue. I've already spoken to many of the freedom leaders, and they're concerned about this too, and the groups are concerned. So I think we're going to have a bigger movement, and I think if we can't get Parliament responsive on this, because really all we're going to ask for is let's get back to deregulation where we were. We're seeing that this isn't working. This isn't working at all. And it doesn't mean that there won't be oversight and good manufacturing practices and that, but you know, not long ago we were unregulated and it was better and we weren't worried about losing our products. So let's get back there. Let's get the Charter of Health Freedom enacted. That's a whole different thing. Is like back in after 2008 when Bill C-51 was defeated, there were two national conferences. So like right down from just consumers to manufacturers, practitioners, stores, everyone got together for two conferences and just said, listen, we're exhausting ourselves just trying to hold the line. Like how Canada comes out with these initiatives, we all have to ramp up, and we're happy if we just don't lose too much. How do we solve this? Like, how do we get in a situation where Canadians, because everyone agrees they want increased access, they don't want decreased access, they want increased access to natural health products. How do we get there? And the idea was, let's have kind of a health bill of rights. We call it the Charter of Health Freedom. So it's just a piece of legislation we want the government to enact that basically sets out the health freedoms courts already say we have. They don't create any. They move the regulation of these safe products. Like they leave the chemical drugs with Health Canada. Everything else goes to a new ministry, the Ministry of Wellness. And instead of presuming they're dangerous and can't be on the market, they're presumed to be safe, and the government can't restrict them unless there's tangible evidence of harm. Like it basically reverses the model as it should be for these types of products, as it is in the States. In the States, these products are food, and by law, they're deemed to be safe, and the FDA can't take them off the market unless the FDA has, you know, substantial evidence of harm. So let's harmonize with the States. It's working there. And like I say, it doesn't mean you're still protected against fraud. You're still protected against adulteration. You still have to have good manufacturing practices and be reasonable. But let's not pretend that things that we eat as foods should be presumed criminal and dangerous. Like that. So the Charter of Health Freedom. So the asks are deregulate, bring in Charter of Health Freedom. And if we're still in this silly, you know, treaty that isn't a treaty, no, let's keep our national sovereignty over how we're going to manage health crises like pandemics. So, and I think both groups will get behind that. Now, if we can't get Parliament responsive and granting those three things, then I think we've learned something. Like we've gone further down that rabbit hole of losing, you know, kind of our standing, who has power, citizens or government. But I actually think we can get it back. Like I think that, you know, we've all really, and again, I don't care where you are in the COVID conversation, even the fact that I have to say that there's like people still can't talk to each other. And I don't care where you were on that, it was traumatizing to be told to wear a mask and to be told to stay home and to be led to believe we were all going to die from this was traumatizing, and we can do it better. And we have to not be scared of our government. We weren't scared of our government before. And again, it doesn't matter whether you agreed or disagreed with what the government did. We couldn't have imagined being so subservient. And our children watched us be afraid of our government. Our children watched their parents being afraid of government. That has never happened in Canadian history. And I don't know what the ramifications for that are going forward. And can I just talk about the police state ritual about showing identity papers?
Yeah.
Because I think it's actually pretty important. And because the problem was, and I have to explain what freedom is. So I live in Alberta, and prior to COVID, we were actually free to do simple things like go to a restaurant, like go to your kid's hockey game. And how you know you're free is your only consideration. You know, do I go to a restaurant tonight? I just don't feel like cooking. And so you go to a restaurant, or no, I'm actually craving this food. I'm going to go but those are the only things. Do I want to do this? Like going to the kids' hockey game, like it's like, yeah, no, I'm not going to work late tonight. I'm going to go to Timmy's hockey game. Like the only consideration is do you want to do that? That's how you know when you're free to do something. Well, here in Alberta, I don't know how it was in Ontario, what your experience was, but we got to this point where to go to a hockey game, your kid's hockey game, or to go to a restaurant, you had to show your identification papers. I mean, we called it your digital passport. And what we saw online was, and again, I don't care where you were on the virus and the vaccine, But we saw people who had the passports gloating over people who didn't. Like, haha, I get to do this and you don't. Because remember how divided we were and how much hate there was? And I remember thinking, anyone who has a passport shouldn't use it. And the joke's on them. And here's why they shouldn't use it, because it's a police state ritual. So I've just explained, when you're free, your only consideration is, do I want to do this? But police states have you show identity papers because it subconsciously reinforces in your mind that you are no longer free, that the state is your master granting you a privilege. So you have to go to your kid's hockey game, you're showing your identity papers. Here it is. Here's my identity papers. And then the state is granting me the privilege. I no longer have the right. And every time I do this, it reinforces subconsciously that I'm a slave and I have to get permission from my master. Do you see how dangerous this is? Like, when you think of classic police states, like let's say Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia, when they would have roadblocks within a major intersection in a city, they didn't care that you were going from one sector of the city to another. They knew where you slept at night. If they wanted to track you down for questioning or anything else, they just show up at night. They know where you're eating supper. They do it because it reinforces in your mind every time you do it that you are subservient to the state and you need to be granted permission to go to the next sector. And it's about reinforcing the master-servant relationship. That's why we have identity papers, and that's why going forward with these new digital IDs that Canada is participating in. Can you imagine having to show? I mean, I saw a YouTube video about a grocery store in the UK where you had to download their app and now show the app for the locking doors to open. Well, that's there to condition people for the digital ID. Where I live in Alberta, some stores like Superstore and Canadian Tire already have turnstiles. And that's just so that when they're locking, it's not that much of a change. And we have to show our digital papers. They're telling us it's coming.
Yeah.
And and our kids are watching us do this. That's what's frightening me. Like, the adults, we can mess with our heads all we want. But our kids are watching us participate in police state rituals. They're not going to have a chance. Like, to them, this will be normal. That's what's keeping me up at night with grief, is just the example we're setting for our kids.
Well, yeah, I mean, in terms of the agenda of the digital passports, I mean, there's the agenda of, the whole context of fascism, state control, but now it's elevated because there's an AI, artificial intelligence element. So now there seems to be more and more of a trend of surrendering our human sovereignty, our national sovereignty, and our personal sovereignty associated with what we see taking place with natural healthcare products to an artificial intelligence construct that we surrender to as humans that are being controlled by certain people to control the humans, and a total control state modeled from the People's Republic of China, where everybody is controlled. So that's one facet. The other facet, which I think is associated with this issue of natural health care products, is this sort of phrase that a lot of doctors were threatened by during the pandemic: vaccine hesitancy. We can't release that data because it's going to make people hesitant. And I'm starting to feel this idea that the Health Canada, maybe they don't want people to be hesitant about injecting their chemicals into their body. I see that whole, the digital IDs. I see this vaccine hesitancy morphing into hesitancy of we want this type of control. We create these products because we wanted to have a certain effect on people, and we don't want this nature to be standing in our way of this highly controlled AI construct that's going to prevent us from controlling humans in the chemicals that we create and manifest to get people to take so they can do certain things and live a certain lifespan, and that's what we want. So this is I'm saying that,
you raise another interesting point, because what I hear you saying, and I hadn't actually thought of it this way, is that because we did just experience, and again, I don't care where you were on the COVID spectrum. I mean, we just did experience literally coercion to take a specific treatment that the government wanted us to take. Like, I mean, it's hard to, I mean, I had friends that didn't want to take it, and they had their own reasons for not wanting to do so, that literally took it solely because they had a mortgage and kids and didn't want their family to be on the street. Like, so, their own personal desire for managing their health was overridden by, this economic necessity that seemed to be imposed on us, at the government's direction. But I hadn't thought of, well, yeah, you take away our natural health products, and that really would take away some of the resistance to any mandated treatments in the future. Because if let's say we have some other pandemic and you feel you're managing it well on natural products, then you're going to be more reluctant to accept, a chemical alternative that's being forced on you. I hadn't thought of that point, but I think there's something to that.
Yeah. I mean, they want to limit, because I mean, people could take certain things, and they don't want you to take those natural things. They want people to only take a certain chemical alleged remedy which is highly profitable for the manufacturers of those remedies. So it's and they're labeling it as, as public health, when people who do have alternate ways of treating their body, they're not interested. They want you to take this, and that's what they want. So they want people to take this particular solution, and now they're trying to limit people into having only a chemical alternative to whatever remedy they want for their human body, in a sort of monopolistic, oligopolistic sort of context. So Health Canada becomes a mouthpiece for certain commercial interests, as they were during the pandemic, and that was sort of the legal precedents that it seemed to me that were set, that they're trying to expand in terms of anywhere that people want to treat themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting, the Health Canada messaging, right? Because we're left with the impression that, they're there to protect our health and all the like. And, I challenge anyone to look at the Food and Drug Act and the drug regulations, and you show me anywhere where they're charged with protecting our health, where there's any duty on them to act in the public interest at all, which is kind of interesting that language and those duties are not there. And I used to just assume that they were there to protect our health. And then it was actually the True Hope case over Empire Plus, when they were charged criminally with selling without a license, despite the fact that the whole industry was unregulated. And there's a Health Canada inspector on the stand. And I'm trying to box her in. So I'm asking her those questions that I'm expecting her to say yes, 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 yes. Like, the questions she can't say no to, so that I kind of create a box for a later question. So I'm going through the setup questions. And one of the setup questions was something like, as a Health Canada inspector, you're there to protect our health. And I'm expecting a yes. And she says no. And Peter, you'll know, you keep your poker face while you're up there. So I pretend like that's the answer I was expecting. But I circle back, and I keep circling back, and I cannot get her to agree with me that, as a Health Canada inspector, that she's there to protect our health. And then she explains, and she's under oath, and she truthfully explains to me, and the light bulbs in my mind go off, that Health Canada is not there to protect our health, that Health Canada is there to enforce the Food and Drug Act and regulations. Well, of course, that's why they're there. They're there to enforce the Food and Drug Act and regulations, and the Food and Drug Act and regulations do not charge them with protecting our health. So for public messaging purposes, they tell us that. So just, so your audience has an idea about how they need to understand that there's a difference with Health Canada between truthful information and political messaging. So let's take the COVID vaccines as an example, and I'll use Pfizer as an example. So if you go to the Health Canada page, for each vaccine, COVID vaccine they've approved, they have a specific page. And, so go to the Pfizer one, but you can go to any of them. And at the top, there's a sentence that says something like, and the sentence is in bold, so they're wanting to emphasize this. It says something like, all COVID-19 vaccines approved of by Health Canada have been proven to be safe, effective, and of the highest quality. Now, that's political messaging that can be mistaken for health information. So in our normal drug approval test found in the drug regulations at C.08.001 and following, you normally do have to provide a lot of evidence of safety, and you have to provide a lot of evidence about efficacy. And safety and efficacy, the whole point of the exercise is to get over the safety and efficacy hurdles. So you have to show the safety profile. You have to prove it's safe. You have to prove that it works reasonably well for what you want to use it for. And then and only then, once you know the safety and efficacy profile, you do a risk-benefit analysis. Basically, is this a good idea? Now we know how safe or dangerous it is and how well it works. Is this a good idea? Do the benefits outweigh the risks? You can't do the benefit-risk analysis without knowing the safety profile and the efficacy profile. Well, only for the COVID-19 vaccines, that test didn't apply. They're the only drugs for serious health conditions in our history that test didn't apply to. The minister came up with an interim order about a month before Pfizer and another company filed. And the interim order said, oh, well, for COVID-19 drugs, this is the drug approval test. Now, I'm going from memory, but I'm going to be pretty close. The test is something like, the minister has sufficient evidence to support the conclusion, and I'll just stop there. The minister is Health Canada, and if, and I'll use Pfizer as an example, if Pfizer has to prove something to Health Canada, it will read, the minister has sufficient evidence to conclude, meaning the minister concludes this. But it doesn't say the minister has sufficient evidence to conclude. It says the minister has sufficient evidence to support the conclusion. Now that's very different. So we know right away that Health Canada doesn't have to agree with what follows. Health Canada just has to accept that there's evidence there to support the conclusion or argument. So you have to be able to Pfizer has to be able to make a cogent argument about what follows. This is already pretty scary, right? Because we're talking about a vaccine that has been rushed, that includes technology we've never used before, that we're basically going to prove for the entire population. And Health Canada doesn't have to be convinced of what follows. So the minister has sufficient evidence to support the conclusion that the benefits of the drug outweigh the risks, having regard to the uncertainties concerning the benefits and risks, and the urgent public health emergency presented by COVID-19. There's no mention of safety there. The word safety is not mentioned. Can I say that again? So all COVID-19 drug vaccines approved by Health Canada, there's no requirement to prove safety.
Yeah. So they don't have to prove safety for the COVID.
Efficacy isn't mentioned there. There's no requirement to prove efficacy. Now, remember, you can't do a risk-benefit analysis unless you know safety and you know efficacy. But actually, the wording, they don't even have to prove the benefits outweigh the risks. They just have to present an argument that the benefits. I'll say the test again. This is very tricky. I testified at the National Citizens Inquiry on this, I think day 2 or day 3 in Montreal or Quebec City. And there's a discussion paper on it at the NHPPA. But listen to the test again. And remember, safety is not mentioned, efficacy is not mentioned, and you actually don't have to prove benefits outweigh the risks. It's a political test. It's not a health test. Yeah. The minister has sufficient evidence to support the conclusion that the benefits of the drug outweigh the risk, having regard to the uncertainties concerning the benefits and risk, and the urgent public health emergency presented by COVID-19. Yeah. That is a political test. It is not a health test. And I'm just talking about how Health Canada's messaging is often political.
Yeah.
So when they're telling us, oh, the vaccines are safe and effective, well, you have to understand that the government agency that approved them
Yeah.
under a test given to them by the government, and the test was mandatory, by the way. So Health Canada had to approve. It was mandatory. So Health Canada could actually be in a situation where they thought the vaccine was not safe. Health Canada could be in the situation where they thought the vaccine was not effective. Health Canada could be in the situation where they feel the benefits don't outweigh the risk, but the test is legally met. And by law, they have to give the approval. It's a political test.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
So how do you advise? How do you advise Mr. Buckley in terms of people who are inspired by what we're saying about the need for us to protect our natural health care products? How do you advise people who get involved? Should they contact your organization?
That's a super question. So I'm part of a nonprofit called the Natural Health Product Protection Association. The website is www.nhppa.org. We've already started one campaign to, pressure the MPs, both by in-person meetings and telephone calls and letter writing. We're going to be launching campaign after campaign after campaign. Subscribe to our newsletter so that we can inform you about actions we want you to take. We've got materials there to teach you what's happening. So we've got like a 2-pager. That's what most people are going to read. Here's what's going on. But then we have a 35-pager written for the industry that gives you the meat and potatoes and has hyperlinks to the source documents. So like the Standing Committee of Health and this legislative initiative and that, so that, you can just go there and go to all the source documents, but it really will educate you. So we've got the materials there, both easy and hard to, depending on how deep you want to go on what's happening. And then we make it easy. So for example, we've got a letter writing campaign. Well, if you want to write your own letter, well, here's all the talking points. Just pick some and write your own letter. If you don't want to write your own letter, here's a form letter with the section that you can put in your own story and your own thoughts. Well, if you don't even want to do that, here's just the form letter. Just put your MP on there, and we're trying to make it easy. And even for meeting your MP, here's how you do it. Here's what you talk about. Here's what you take. So plug in. It's the only surviving health freedom organization out there dealing with natural health products. There used to be like 20, 25, but because Health Canada hasn't been doing anything active on this front for so long, we're the last one left standing.
The last one. Well, hopefully, you can awaken some of those dormant groups and get them involved with your cause, so that the more the merrier in terms of getting some action involved on a common front. So could you repeat your website one more time?
Yeah, so www.nhppa. So NHP just stands for Natural Health Product, and then we're Protection Association, right? www.nhppa.org. Like I say, subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on our social media, and you'll be alerted to when we push stuff out.
Any question you want to ask Santosh?
Pretty much everything that had to be said was said by you, and hopefully people will be more aware of this. And there's definitely better solutions for the illness that they may be having than just going straight to the government. Just try to also do your own research, and I think that's the best message for anyone. Don't trust anybody blindly. Just do your own research.
Oh yeah. No, you have to nowadays.
Exactly.
I think there's a couple things we have to do. Is first of all, you have to check your sources, and secondly, you now have to start taking personal responsibility for things. Like we're talking about natural health products, but there's so many areas of our lives where we just need to now be involved, where before we didn't. And so I think this is a time. Like a lot of you I think all of us have felt that we were here for something important, and I actually think now we're here for this time. Because it's actually an exciting time. Because what happens is you'll put structures and stuff in place, and then you become complacent, and they'll stop working for you. So you have to peacefully get them back. But then it gives you an opportunity to go, well, how can we do this a little better the next time? It's really, really exciting. That was the purpose of the National Citizens Inquiry. If you just let me talk about that for a second, for your viewers who weren't aware. So the National Citizens Inquiry, it was totally citizen organized and funded. Literally, it was funded by $25 and $50 donations. it appointed 4 independent commissioners, and it marched them across the country for 3 days of hearings in each city. So they were in Truro, Nova Scotia, Toronto, Winnipeg, Saskatoon, Red Deer, Vancouver, Quebec City, Ottawa. 325 witnesses called under oath by lawyers and questioned on how all levels of government handled COVID. And we're talking people from every side of and every belief about what happened. But and the idea originally was, well, let's just find out what happened, and then the commissioners are in the process of preparing a report, and they're supposed to come out with positive recommendations on how we could do things better. Like, this was not an axe grinding exercise. It was, well, what happened and how do we do it better? But one thing that happened was, is how people are divided? People started talking again, and people started seeing the other side, and actually even understanding, like, we had such similar experiences, even though we believed different things. And it started a dialogue and a healing. Like, if you start watching, you just pick three witnesses. Like, there's 24 days of hearing. Just pick a day and watch 3 witnesses. But the problem is you won't stop watching. You watch a whole day and you'll never be the same. And anyone who's done it will agree. There will be times you won't be able to not weep. Like, it was the strangest thing. We'd be in there and we'd just be hearing somebody telling their story. And you had no choice. You had to weep. I was weeping. Like, I'm standing there. I'm the lawyer calling a witness, and I'm weeping. Like, it's never happened to me before, but you couldn't not. It was just the most powerful experience. And nowhere in the world, ever in history, have citizens got together and appointed independent commissioners, just other citizens, to do a neutral, balanced inquiry into how government handled an issue. Like, even that model itself has started something. Like, other countries are now talking about, citizens in other countries are talking about doing it in their countries. It's just powerful, but we need to start talking again. We need to start loving each other again. We need to start cutting each other slack. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to have different opinions. Like, we can get back to that, where we actually care for each other, even though we might disagree on things. That's okay.
Yes, unfortunately, during the pandemic, that we've a society manifested where people don't want to listen to each other. They just tightly in their own sort of, tunnel vision and a lack of empathy, and just attacking people just for honestly expressing their experiences, whether it's vaccine or what have you. I mean, to me, it's a very destructive mindset reinforced by the mainstream media, which starts to vilify citizens who have real experiences to share and are being, this is what what's that big report at Fox Network was talking about, Mr. Carlson, about people being censored for just sharing honest experiences. So, it's very disturbing, the type of society we're involved in. You just have an honest experience, and then you're going to be attacked, and people are going to just say, oh, you're not saying what you're supposed to say, we're going to attack you. To me, that's very disturbing.
But we participated in that, and we have to guard against it. Like, I think the narrative's going to change, and we're going to find ourselves in a situation where the mainstream narrative becomes, this was a tragic mistake, and people are going to be really mad. And we actually have to be forgiving and loving, going the other way. Like, we can't, we have to be peaceful. We have to actually set the stage going forward where we're actually compassionate and loving. And we have to, as a nation, begin acting differently, and learn from the experience, and actually learn, how we can get, just all ramped up when we don't need to be. Like, the irony is, if you're in a real pandemic, and I say real pandemic, like, I challenge anyone to go to the National Citizens Inquiry. And actually, Denis Rancourt is a professor, full professor at the University of Ottawa, and he testified 3 times, but he testified just a couple of weeks ago virtually, using all-cause mortality statistics of governments. So now, all-cause mortality just measures total number of deaths. So it doesn't matter what the government or doctors or health officials are saying are the cause of deaths. It's just total number of deaths. That's all we're talking about. Well, I mean, in COVID, apparently this virus wouldn't cross provincial or state lines. So, and it might not leave a city like it. And the point being is, well, it wasn't the virus causing the upticks, because viruses do cross state lines. And but what we find is first of all, there's no bump in all-cause mortality. So we weren't having anything. We had influenza seasons where all-cause mortality was worse than. So we weren't even having a bad flu season. And so here we go through all this, lockdowns and masking and that. And as a nation, we're not dying more. But in some provinces we are, like in Alberta, when young men weren't working anymore and they have these huge debt loads, like, the oil patch is a different kettle of fish. They were killing themselves. Mm-hmm. We actually had a bump of young Alberta men killing themselves. Oh, no. In a province like Quebec, you don't see any change at all. Mm-hmm. And then you see a bump as soon as the vaccines start being introduced. Mm-hmm. But, it's interesting because all-cause mortality, it doesn't lie. We had Ed Dowd testify. For those of you, he used to run a $2 billion fund at BlackRock, and he turned it into $14 billion. It's like a legend, and his expertise is crunching numbers. Mm. Well, the group life insurance policies in the United States, you basically have to be working for big companies to have group life insurance and group disability insurance. Well, those are traditionally the people working for big companies are the healthiest part of the U.S. population. They die less and they get disabled less. Yeah. Well, their all-cause mortality and their disability just shot through the roof. And they were traditionally the most healthy part of the U.S. population, and it reversed. The non-working people who traditionally would be disabled more and had a higher death rate, because if you are disabled, first of all, you're not going to be working anyway. But it became the most dangerous. It reversed, and it reversed only when the vaccines came into play. And it's like, okay, now that's pretty interesting. So the healthiest part of the population, which is there'll be more vaccinated because they had to be vaccinated to keep working. Whereas the people who weren't working, a higher percentage are not vaccinated. All of a sudden, the most healthy group that's most vaccinated becomes the most unhealthy. And their disability rate and death rate is just shot through the roof. Well, how do you explain that? And there's all these questions that, they don't add up, and it's really interesting. Like I say, you guys have to watch that. Yeah. It will blow your mind. Like on both sides. You think you knew what was happening?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, and all this kind of information, you're definitely not going to find on places like the CBC and other establishment media that wants to keep a certain narrative. Is there any sort of point, Mr. Buckley, that we haven't covered, that you wanted to cover, that you wanted to get emphasized to our audience out there about natural health care products or anything associated to them?
No, I think we've been pretty thorough, and I have to say I really have enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that.
Fantastic. Awesome. So thank you very much. So thank you very much, Mr. Buckley, for taking the time to bring to us today this important information that people who, like myself, who love natural health care products, want to build our immunity, keep us healthy as possible and free from chemical dependency. We wanted to thank you for sharing your insights and how we can get involved to bring a collective consciousness to resisting the type of nefariousness which seems to be happening at levels to try to criminalize the use of, healthcare products, and for criminalize people who are trying to make that information accessible to people who rely on such information for their quality of life and even their survival as people. So thank you very much, Mr. Buckley, for taking the time today, and we encourage people out there to check out the website that Mr. Buckley had talked about. It's right underneath this video that we have so that you can access. And thank you very much, Santosh, for joining us today as the co-interviewer today on a very important topic. Thank you very much again.
Yeah, thank you guys. Really appreciate what you're doing.